Hey guys, in today's video I wanted to go over different types of transmissions that Volkswagen used over the years on air-cooled cars, where the identification numbers are so that you can use that to determine what year it is and what gear ratios it has. I'll also show you how to shift the transmission into each gear, rotate it over, and get a general idea of the overall condition, and see if it's a viable unit to use in your project. All right, so let's start with the different types of Volkswagen transmissions that were used in these cars from the factory. Here on the cart, we have a swing axle transmission. Swing axle transmissions have a solid axle in here that has a joint, and they can articulate up and down on this joint, but on the outer side, it's just solid there. So you'll see bugs that, excessively lowered or things like that, and the wheel will be really cocked in like this. Sometimes when you jack up the car, this wheel will drop down and be in this position, and then when you put it back down, it'll straighten back out. That's generally what happens with a swing axle when you move this, because your wheel surface is going to stay straight to this axle. So whatever position this axle's in is what position the surface of this drum or rotor, whatever you have on here, is going to be with the wheel on it. The next type of transmission that VW used is a IRS transmission, which stands for independent rear suspension. These transmissions overall look pretty much like a swing axle. The main difference is they've got independent rear suspension. So instead of having a swing axle with a tube coming out, they use a CV shaft is what it's called, and it'll have a CV, constant velocity joint, that bolts onto this flange. And what happens is when that joint, when you hit bumps, any kind of movement of the suspension, the inner joint and the outer joint are able to flex independently. So your tire and wheel basically stays true to the road as it moves up and down, just allowing for a little better overall handling. And that was kind of the idea of an IRS transmission. Okay. Identification numbers on Volkswagen transmissions are generally towards the back here. And let me get a light on this. I've cleaned this one up already. And you can see this particular transmission, 7920174. Volkswagen transmissions before, I believe, 1968 are just going to have a number code like that. They're basically an A transmission. There's an A, B. There's a few different ones. And they're just going to have a 6 or, I believe, 7-digit number here like this one. And you can use that number to determine the year of the transmission. I'll add a chart here. All right, so with the IRS transmission turned on its side, we can see the number in the same place that the number is stamped on a swing axle transmission. This particular transmission is an AH, which makes it a late 68, basically a 69 model year, all the way up to 72, and gives it a 412 ring and pinion. Okay, this is a later 68 and up bus transmission. This particular one is what's referred to as a 3-rib, a 002 transmission. There is a 5-rib and there is a 6-rib as the years go on. Looking at this transmission, we have to check the opposite side of what a Type 1 and early Type 2s would be for the number. So what we have to do is we have to turn this over, and the number is going to be on what would be the driver's side of the transmission. So here I've got the transmission laid over on its side, and we can get up underneath right here and we can take a look. This is a CK transmission. So that tells us that this is a 72, 73 era 1700 cc bus transmission. Okay, so in order to check out the transmission, we're going to have to shift it into each gear and see how it shifts into gears. Before we can do that, we got to understand where we need to move this shift rod in order to get it into each individual gear. So what I'm going to do is I have your standard Volkswagen looking shift pattern. I'm going to flip it over so that it's the orientation of it is the same as the transmission, where the front of the car is facing this way. So we've got first gear, second gear, third, and fourth, with a reverse hanging over here. So in order to look at this, what we need to do, this is in neutral right now. You've got the big swing back and forth. You have to understand the way a shifter is designed. You've got a ball inside of a seat in the shifter. This is a little short aftermarket one, but it's the same on all of them. As you shift forward, you bring the shifter over to the driver's side and then forward to get into first gear. And you'll notice that the ball that engages the actual shift rod in the tunnel is moving the opposite of what you're moving the shifter. So your input is opposite of what the transmission requires in order to go into each gear. So the way we look at this is we're in neutral now. We have first gear is going to be on a relatively straight plane, meaning side to side motion, and the rod is going to be pushed up into the transmission, back into the transmission. Second gear, it's going to be on that same relatively straight plane, and then we're going to be pulling the rod out of the transmission. Third, we're going to go all the way over to the driver's side, and the rod is going to go back into the transmission, similar to first. Fourth gear, again, we're going all the way over to the driver's side, just like third, and the rod is going to be pulled out of the transmission. So now if we look at this, if I'm in neutral now, and you can feel, if you pull forward, you can feel a notch there. There's another slight notch there, and then all the way over into what I'm calling the driver's side position. So now if we, let's see, yep, that was neutral. Okay, so we're in neutral. If I want to get into first gear, I need to be on this plane where I'm almost straight, but just slightly off to the passenger side. And then I need to push the shifter straight back in to the transmission. And there's first gear. If we want second gear, we're going to pull the shift rod straight out. We pass neutral and we come out into second gear. Let's go back into neutral. Oops. Okay, there's back into neutral. Now to get into third gear, we're going to take this, that's where we were for first and second. We're going to come all the way over towards the driver's side. And then we're going to push this in for third gear. So see, we're in and over, and that's third gear. Fourth gear, we're going to pull out, past, there's neutral, and we keep going, and that's into fourth. Now reverse, let me get back into neutral. There we go, back into neutral. Reverse is a little odd to look at. A lot of dirt here. When you put a Volkswagen shifter into reverse, you're pushing down. You're actually disengaging this cup in here, and what's actually happening is this whole section is dropping past a gate in the shift plate, and then you're coming down, and then you're pulling over towards second gear. So you can see that the bottom of the rod is actually kind of going forward and way over to the driver's side. So if we look at that, we're going to go hard to the passenger side is where the rod needs to go, and then straight out of the transmission. It's kind of, you can get a little screwed up by it because you're thinking in terms of what your hand is doing to the shifter, but you've got to reverse that. So to get into reverse, if I need to push it all the way to the driver's side and back, I need to actually, the rod needs to go all the way to the passenger side and forward in order to function that way. So now we're in neutral. I'm gonna go, this is the notch right here. You can see there's a little hump here, and then I drop down into that notch. You might be able to hear the click. That's the notch that you would go first and second gear, where your shifter is almost upright. Now to get into reverse, when you push down, it's allowing you to get past that point into this little bit right in here. And then when you're putting it in reverse, you're actually pulling out. So now that transmission is in reverse. We go back in. We've got straight up and down, a little bit to the passenger side. Again, we're first gear, second gear. Nope. Missing neutral here. And then we're third gear and fourth gear. And then we go back into neutral, all the way hard over to the passenger side, out for reverse. And that's it. That's how you would shift the transmission into gear so that you can then check it. Okay, so now that we understand where the shift rod needs to be in order to understand what gear we're in, what I like to do when I'm looking at an old transmission is I like to put the transmission in each gear. In this case, I'm in reverse. Rotate the input shaft by hand, and you can kind of feel, whether it's smooth, whether it has something not kind of rolling around right inside, and you go back and forth, forward. Volkswagen engines run in a clockwise direction. So rotating clockwise is what makes sense, but you can kind of go back and forth and feel if there's any play. You'll have a little bit of noise, but that's about the gist of it. And then I like to go into each gear, check each gear. This is a forward gear. So obviously we're moving forward. Check the next one. Also down into first gear, and then out into second gear, and just kind of move through all the gears and just check how they feel and how things rotate. Obviously, if you can't get it into a gear, it's very likely that something's wrong with that gear. But that's it. That's, you figure out the shift on it and figure out how you're going to get it into each gear. And it's just that simple to kind of roll things over and just see how things go. Checking a transmission this way lets you know basically how the transmission functions. There's no guarantee that this transmission would function perfectly just because it shifts through the gears, just because it rotates smoothly. The really only way to test a transmission is to have a load on it. It has to be in a car. It has to have an engine on it, rotating at 2,000 RPM or so, whatever the range is. In order to hear if there's bearing noise, if there's any kinds of popping in and out of gear. Really what I'm showing you is just to see if the thing is complete junk or if there's hope for it where you can get in and out of each gear, everything rotates smoothly, and then you go from there. So Volkswagen transmissions are, for the most part, I believe there are a few that they made that were limited slip, but for the most part, they're an open differential. And what that means is if you spin one wheel one direction, the other wheel is going to spin the opposite direction. So they're an open differential. So if you want to check your ring and pinion, we've already looked at this transmission and we've identified that this transmission is based on the number on the side of it. We've figured out this is a 1965 Type 1 transmission. So the ring and pinion in this is going to be a 4.375. The fourth gear is a 0.89. if you multiply those together, that's going to give us a final drive of 3.89. So how you can actually measure or check if that's what this transmission actually is, maybe somebody's been in and switched out a ring and pinion. Maybe that number on the side is missing and you're not even sure what it is. This is a way that you can check the ring and pinion and identify what the number is on it, or what the number of teeth basically are, based on rotations. So I have tape on here with a mark. I've lined up all my marks. I have this little tab here on the center of tape so that you can see this is straight up and down. With an open differential, the way that you're going to want to check your ring and pinion, or your final drive in this case, because it's a transmission and a rear differential all in one piece, you're going to check final drive. You need to block one wheel, needs to not be able to rotate. Otherwise, you'll have one go forward, one go back. And what you're essentially doing is you're splitting the amount of power that's going each side by doing that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to rotate the free wheel. Imagine there's a wheel on here if you have this all in a car, or if you just got a drum sticking out because you're looking at something, or if it's an IRS and it's just got the flange hanging off the side of the transmission. It can be done either way. Just need a mark here and here. And then all you're going to do is you're going to rotate the drum. Because it's an open differential, you're going to rotate this 2 times forward in 4th gear. So let's throw it in the 4th gear. Okay, that should be 4th gear there. And I'm going to rotate this drum. And we're going to count the number of rotations on this shaft. So we're going to start here, and we've got 1 rotation, 2, 3, and then as we're coming up on 4, you can see I'm getting close to my mark here, so I'm going to stop. That's 2 rotations of the drum, and we've made 3 and just a hair under 4 rotations of the shaft. And the final drive on this transmission should be 3.89. So we get 3.89 rotations of the shaft. And if you think about it in either quarters or tenths even, 0.89 essentially is 1/10 of a rotation. So if you look at this, that is essentially 1/10 of a rotation. So we know that the final drive, or what we're measuring here, ends up being 3.89. So if I look at specs, even without knowing the number on the transmission, I can look at a spec and I can say that based on that 3.89, this transmission, all that Volkswagen offers here, is a 4.375 ring and pinion and a 0.89 4th gear. So we know that we're exactly what we're supposed to be, in this transmission is a stock 1965 transmission. So it's pretty simple to do that, to check things if your number doesn't work out. If I didn't block this wheel, you'd see what would end up happening is this side would actually turn slightly in there. It can. I mean, this one's a little hung up. But what you could possibly get is a little bit of movement. And as you do this, if you look, I can change the input shaft. It's not even moving right now. So you start losing count, and your count is inaccurate as these move independent. Where if you lock one side, in my case, I just got the weight of it on a block of wood. If you had this still in a car, your tire could still be on the ground. This one could be up off the ground, and it would do the exact same thing. But this is gonna, when I move this, it's now locking everything together, and this shaft can't spin independently of this drum because this side is locked. Where, like I just showed you, everything's independent out here. I can hold one, or if I move both of them at the same time, the shaft rotates independently on it. So that's just a little tip on how to check that out. Hopefully this video helps you. I'm going to try to draw up that direction of pulling the shift rod, and I'll try to attach it. Maybe I can figure out how to get it to be a printable file or something that I can attach onto there. But either way, I'll at least show a diagram of it anyway, a cleaner one that's not just a drawn one. All right, well, I appreciate you watching. If you've already subscribed to the channel, I really appreciate it. Just trying to get some more Volkswagen information out there for people. If you haven't subscribed yet and this helps you out, do me a favor and subscribe, and it'll help, keep the channel growing. Really appreciate it. Thanks.